Welcome to Realizing Resilience, a podcast from the Connecticut Women's Consortium. We're not behavioral health professionals, but we're your gateway to real conversations with the experts. Each episode, we'll delve into the vast landscape of mental health, from personal stories to expert insights. Together, we'll bridge the gap between clinical expertise and personal experiences, connecting with diverse voices and perspectives. Join us for insightful conversations that demystify the world of mental health. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Realizing Resilience. I am Marisa.
I'm Alana.
And today we have the utmost pleasure to be talking to Amy Otzel, who's a retired U.S. Army Behavioral Health Sergeant and Iraq War veteran. She's formerly served as a U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs readjustment counseling therapist, as well as State of Connecticut Military Support Program clinician. Currently, she's a private practice licensed professional counselor promoting resiliency, connectivity, and personal growth opportunities with military members, veterans, and their families. Contributes to educational service as a Yale University Department of Psychiatry lecturer, an adjunct faculty of psychology and counseling, a professional development educator, and a holistic health and stress management instructor, and a breath, body, mind teacher. She really does it all. In volunteer service, Amy's an assertive advocate who has led by example as a peer support representative, spearheaded extensive outreach, assisted with the organization of a veterans coffeehouse chapter, and formerly acted as co-chairperson of the VA CT Mental Health Community Advisory Board. Thank you, Amy, for joining us today and being able to talk with us.
Yeah, hi. I'm so honored to be here today. Thank you so much for having me aboard.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got an extensive list of things that you've done for veterans and also in the military. And so I know that veteran and military mental health is, a huge topic, and I think it's becoming even bigger, which is great. So what aspect of this work would you say is like the most important to you and why?
Yeah, so what I'd say is the most important aspect to working with service members, veterans, and their families is really for the helping professional to be armed with information. That's number one. And coming from a place of cultural humility with this group of folks is top priority. It's paramount. And the reason why I say that is because the military culture is a culture of its own that is particularly complex, very unique, but it also is comprised of individuals who come from so many different cultures and walks of life themselves. And for a good opportunity to connect with the population, it is imperative that a helping professional has a real openness and awareness to many of the nuances that build the context around the lifestyle, the beliefs, the values, the strengths, the vulnerabilities, the mores, the ideals, the challenges, the whole breadth of the military cultural experience. And turns out really that upon research into the population, we find that there are two biggest factors that somebody from this group really wants for their counseling professional to be equipped with. And one, first and foremost, that is their ability to be open, engage, and connect. And we can't really do that if we don't have a general understanding of the culture in order to build rapport, the sensation of a relationship that's happening, right? Folks in this cultural group do tend to have a great deal of stigma and barriers to engaging in mental health services. So as a helping professional, if you have the opportunity to connect with someone from this group, it is extremely important to have the skill set to really make a worthwhile connection at the forefront. We know that individuals who feel that their providers are more culturally aware and culturally sensitive and are willing to consider and be interested in and explore cultural tenets with their clients will engage more fully, will stay in the helping relationship longer. And of course, with those two things in place, are incredibly more likely to benefit from the experience. So the cultural humility piece of being paramount really relates to the way that a practitioner embodies their therapeutic stance. The manner in which they come to each and every session and each and every encounter. And that could apply to all populations for sure. But again, in terms of the military veteran and family member population, we have decades of controversy in our society, in our politics, in our world. People's views and perceptions can be underinformed, misinformed, and certainly have biases that are present. So, the number one way of really beginning to engage culturally is by the provider doing some of their own self-reflection and becoming aware of what do I know, what don't I know, what can I learn to prepare. And additionally, when doing some of that insightful introspection, what are some of my strengths and challenges in thinking about and being open to and receiving this population? And of course, recognizing that you don't have to shift and alter your own values, but you just have to be aware of them and how compatible or incompatible they may be with the person you're working with. Not again to change them in any way, but to assure and protect against having them impose into the therapeutic encounter. So, really, that whole culturally humble stance and way of being is important to establish that connection, but also learning a little bit about the culture itself, some of the hard and fast tenets about a common military lifestyle and experience. So ultimately, I think those are the two most important things when working with this population is cultural humility and cultural knowledge.
Yeah, I love what you said in the beginning there, armed with information, because
Yeah.
it truly is. Information truly is, I think, a great starting point. That's really what fills your backpack to be able
Yes.
to go on this trip. Like, information really is what you need to get somewhere.
Yes. And when I use the language armed with information, that's actually the vision that I have in my mind, just like you said about the backpack. What resources do you have? And ultimately, your resource bag, that equipment that you bring to the table can grow as you gather more information. It's empowering. It helps people create choice in what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And often when I start a lot of my trainings regarding this population, I let folks know, I'm not really here to tell you how to do something a certain way or what exactly to do, but I believe that you come to the table already with really good clinical competencies, clinical skill sets, your own effective way of being, but that in order to harness all of that better and apply it better with a certain population, that's where the piece about being informed further outside of the work that you do and into the expertise of the person with whom you're serving, tap into what you can learn about them directly from them. They are an expert in who they are and how they've lived their life. And a lot of times that process of guiding them through the inventory and inspection of who they are and how they've lived and what their values and beliefs are, strengths and challenges, it can be helpful and healing to them, but also it creates an opportunity for them to come into their personhood, but also for the practitioner to really become aware of their personhood and connect with it and utilize that personhood as the guiding feature of applying their really good clinical skill sets.
Do you feel like there can kind of be a tendency to sort of like paint everyone who's completed military service with the same brush?
If I'm understanding you correctly, and of course, help me if I'm not, but it sounds like what you're asking is if someone becomes more informed, might they generalize that information across each military member, veteran, or family member? Is that what you're asking?
Right. Yeah. And just thinking about societal attitudes and like you were saying, the stigma of the type of person who goes into the military, I think think the cultural humility thing is obviously huge because you're trying to learn to set aside that bias. But I guess is that sort of what you're hoping to rectify with some of your work, is to give people a little bit more agency and help them kind of see their clients on a more individual basis?
Yeah, so to address kind of both of those pieces, one, I think there are lots of different tendencies. I don't think there's one tendency to look at this population or view it in a very certain way. I think there are multiple different ways that this population can, in fact, be viewed in tendency. So, an example of that might be tendency to view it with maybe a more negative mindset, maybe a more concerned mindset around fearfulness, if you will, about maybe some common concerns with a post-war veteran's anger or aggression. On the other hand, there might be some other tendencies for providers to have a sense of extreme emotional concern that rises to the level of pity, if you will. That what a shame, how much you sacrifice, what a hard loss that must be. There might be an over tendency in that direction to just feel so sadly for someone. There might be other tendencies like, how might you not be able to succeed post military service? There's an abundance of resources out there for you. And why can't you possibly tap into them? How, there must be something that you're not doing, maybe not recognizing certain barriers there that would impose themselves upon the service person or family member. There's a variety of tendencies, I think, for folks to sort of have. Ultimately, really in line with cultural humility, it's that regardless of the culture itself, it's how much has someone assimilated to it, how much have they embodied, and how does that change over time? So it is always important for an individual to learn, but again, pay most important focus on the person with whom is coming from that culture and really gain a sense of how much the culture has permeated their life over different points in time. And maybe in recognizing some commonalities or common threads, you might always strive to assess in each individual to what degree they ascribe to that particular way of being or that particular ideal or value. Or another example is a service person may have had some very extreme operational or combat stress, but might not have a perspective or even a symptom profile that is in line with trauma. So, everybody is still going to have their own unique experience, and recognizing that that's a great conversation to have. That as I learn more about what this person is presenting for, what their goals are, what their needs are in terms of promoting their health and healing, and how they share, and we explore the information that builds the foundation for how they're currently looking towards goal attainment, that we can examine what is the meaning of that to you? How much do you view that your life has been impacted? In what way have you grown from that in all of the challenges? So I think there's always going to be a dialectic, if you will, the forces of both positive and maybe challenge on the opposing side. That is super important to be cautious of overgeneralization, utilizing generalization as a platform to explore and guide dialogue and inquiry, but ultimately recognize that each individual is going to have their own perspective on how they've been impacted or how they make meaning out of it themselves. And then now that I talked so long there, what was the second part of your question?
I think that answers it. It's really insightful to think about the generalization moving into pity. I feel like generally when I think of stereotypes about the military, it's people having negative connotations or being very supportive. But I think that line between support and pity is really interesting, and how as a person who's in a helping profession and is kind of naturally empathetic, you can sort of go there without really meaning to. So breath, body, mind, how does that holistic health stuff work in? And I guess, are there kind of different biases regarding holistic health integration when you're serving this type of population?
So excellent questions on that. So breath, body, mind. Okay. So first of all, what is breath, body? So breath, body, mind is a particular program that was developed by two integrative psychiatrists, Dr. Richard Brown and Dr. Patricia Gerbar. And the two of them essentially combined ancient wisdom of healing practices with modern day evidence-based science. That was ultimately their goal. And Dr. Brown came from a rich history of military influence in his family life. And he himself had been training in different types of martial arts throughout many years. And what he really recognized as he was growing in that training himself, and then also in his application as a psychiatrist, was that many of the philosophical tenets, as well as the actual practices of things like Qigong and Tai Chi, could be particularly helpful, not only in promoting warrior success, warrior empowerment, but also recovering from the burdens of stress involved with a fighting force. And so, additionally, pairing that with the power of the breath and breath work in its regulating capacity of the autonomic nervous system, as well as mindfulness practices, together formed breath, body, mind. So the breath work is the piece, of course, that is compatible with the breath. And then body being the physical movements that are actually incorporating of breath and mind as well, that come from mostly Qigong influence. And then mind, of course, mindfulness and meditative practices. So that's ultimately sort of the trifecta, of course, of breath, body, mind. And breath, body, mind, really in its application here, the military population, whether during service, post-service as a veteran, and for military connected individuals, family members, etc., this is a lifestyle that has a great deal of stress. And really stress is sort of built into the culture. It is essentially what we all agree to take on just by, entering into the service. It's really an automatic. The operational tempo, the demands, the standards, really all of that helps us rise to the professional standards of our forces. And of course, the military family being so hardy, if you will, in how they really need to support the service member. They're a part of the team. They are an integral part of assuring the service member's accomplishments. So ultimately, with all of that, there's a great deal of stress. And then, of course, it's also due to the nature of the service, it's one that you can encounter other kinds of stressors. And at times, they could be rather traumatic stressors, especially in tactical or war zone environments. So inherent to this population is stress. So one, breath, body, mind training can really assist and support in advance, if you will. There has been a great contribution of work and research done by Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas. She was a former military Marine officer and then later transitioned into a researcher, author, and wrote a book called Bulletproofing the Psyche. And what her work shows is that by incorporating the variety of different practices that are a part of breath, body, mind, she wasn't speaking directly to breath, body, mind, but speaking to the variety of practices, that we can promote a more resilient force, that we can help people at the outset build their resiliency strength, hone their autonomic nervous system, right? Hone their parasympathetic relaxation response, tone their sympathetic nervous system stress response to better allow for, stress activation to return to homeostasis so that people can, hopefully prevent the consequences of autonomic nervous system dysregulation that really wreaks havoc across our American lifestyle these days, right? Our stress response is so dominant. So if we know that a population is moving into a stress lifestyle, then we can equip them with the resiliency skills and tools to help them maintain and sustain their well-being. The second piece of that is that we have not ever done that for any length of time before. And in terms of that not being an initiation opportunity, it is long the case that our military veteran and family member population has not been equipped with this type of helpfulness. And so we tend to have a great deal of individuals who are suffering from chronic impacts of stress. And stress is an equal opportunity destroyer. It wreaks havoc across all domains of functioning, whether that is mental, emotional, relational, spiritual, physical, energetic, just wreaking havoc really over all parts of our being. And so even if we look at conditions of mental health, conditions of stress and trauma, all of them involve an autonomic nervous system dysregulation. And so we can harness the power of practices like coherent breathing as one example. Coherent breathing is breathing at an equal inhalation to an equal exhalation, anywhere between about 3 to 6 seconds. Oftentimes we start at about 5 seconds per inhale, 5 seconds per exhale. And doing that, the research has shown brings our system back into a coherent state. We are able to bring down the fight or flight stress response while simultaneously activating what has now become a weakened parasympathetic or relaxation response. So additionally, working with practices like Qigong, again, there is mindful intention, there is breath work and movement that is all combined into a flow. And in that, Qigong is the art of cultivating the internal energy of a human being. And our vitality is often compromised by a great deal of tension of all sorts, mental, physical, emotional tension. And so from that paradigm, we can work towards restoring the flow of our energy throughout our body. And that, of course, is going to impact our mental and emotional abilities as well. Additionally, the mindfulness has so many benefits. It can certainly assist and support people who are still in the service and need those skill sets of high situational awareness, harnessing their attention and concentration, utilizing good mental focus, but also when difficulties after that prolonged stress response, challenges of losing the connection between our mind and body, experiencing an overabundance of worry, fear, agitation, irritability. We can really utilize all of these mechanisms to bring back our strength, our recovery, our resilience, but also, thinking about the second part of your question, what's the reception to this? Well, going back to culture, oftentimes the military culture is sort of in a culture clash, if you will, with behavioral health culture. Our culture of rolling out behavioral health services is dominated by a pathology model. What's wrong with you? How bad is it? What are the symptoms? What diagnostic label can I give? And it's a great deal of looking at what's not right with a person. And of course, that has some utility, but in extreme caution, it can have a profound problematic barrier effect when working with really almost any human being, but especially one who comes from such a heightened in culture that emphasizes achievement, accomplishment, strengths, empowerment, competency, proficiency, efficiency. It is a known barrier at the outset that the military population is aware that if they go into a heightened medical model system, that their strengths are probably not going to be at the forefront of the visit. And that right there is a barrier. And again, if they've made it into your office, we really need to harness and leverage the culture in order to help them sustain the engagement and create that connection. And so, turns out research shows us that one of the biggest fears and reluctances that this population has in engaging with a mental health provider is that they have to take on the behavioral health culture, they have to accept it, and that they might really be pushed with the encouragement towards psychotropic medications, towards pathologically based mindsets. And so when we think about the potential for something like breath, body, mind, it has the opportunity to be more culturally compatible because breath, body, mind is working towards empowering the individual's ability to heal and grow. And so the healing power of the breath is something that's always with us. It's a self-empowered healing tool. It is a skill. It is a strategy. You can teach it. It can be taught. People can learn. And the military is great at that, right? We have to train at all times when we're not actively engaged otherwise, right? We're always training. And it's about comprehensive fitness and ongoing personal advancement. And so we can frame holistic health and healing strategies as another aspect of promoting your core value of personal readiness, of accomplishment, of personal growth. We can reframe a treatment plan as a wellness mission. That how can we arm you with the skill set to support your own health and growth and well-being? You know, it is also, again, with the philosophy and the tenets of practices like Qigong and meditation and even breath work, all part of very ancient and, ongoing warrior cultures. We can align and educate about that and help make the connection to broaden the buy-in. And, really the reception is very well. As a matter of fact, some years back, I want to say it was 2017, there was a very large study of this is particular veterans who are post-service time. What do veterans want as treatment options? And come to find out, it turns out the number one thing they wanted was complementary, an alternative option. And so the VA began implementing, to a certain degree, integrative medicine into their practice guidelines and offerings. And then another research study was done, I believe it was 2019, and it was entitled, "We Built It, Did They Come?" And it turns out they did. There was a real heightened increase in veterans accessing different types of complementary and integrative modalities. So in that vein, just more tie in to how these types of practices are and are expected to be more well received by the population.
I love that you can come at not only your work, but talking about what veterans need in trying to reacclimate themselves into a situation that they haven't been in so long. I like that you can feel the passion that you have for this, not only just for helping people, but because you've lived it. And I think that also has a good kind of lights a fire in you when you know what other people are feeling. And I can feel that in all of your answers, which is great. And so everything that you're saying really captivates us just listening to your explanations about everything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
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 And actually, that is a big piece. I mean, even though I am a therapist and I was a behavioral health sergeant in the Army, like I myself have been in counseling and psychotherapy for well over 15 years. It has to be a good 18 years long. And I have learned a great deal in terms of engaging in the experience about what works well, what doesn't, but also being a provider for folks and dedicating my research inquiries into this line as well, and really being immersed in the community, I do have such a well-rounded, if you will, way of gauging what I come to know. And even with Breath, Body, Mind, I credit a portion of that to being so integral in my ability to continue doing this work after experiencing trauma myself and being in a basically lifelong healing and recovery journey as well. Breath, Body, Mind, I remember when I first practiced it, it was back in March of 2014. And my son was 3 years old, and it was very difficult for me to feel connected to him. And I cognitively knew how much I loved him, but I emotionally had a great difficulty at feeling it. And I remember I was immersed in a weekend training with Breath, Body, Mind. And while I was practicing, I had a stirring of emotional sensations. And I was able to label it as, I feel the love for my son. And it meant the absolute world to me. And so I continued to cultivate my practice with Breath, Body, Mind, as well as that new open window now gave me even more of a mindset that growth and healing and change is possible. Like, wow, I experienced it. I can connect. And, so much more of that evolved from there. And nobody could give me a gift greater than that. And the even cooler thing was that that was something that I did. I did it. It didn't come from a pill. It didn't come from someone telling me that I, fulfilled a certain part of my treatment plan. It did. It was something that I could take with me anywhere I go and practice it and utilize it and continue to progress. And so in all of these types of things, it has always simultaneously become my mission to bring that back around as a peer advocate and work towards bringing the stigma down and work towards being a person coming from lived experience and an agent of hope and change, and then sharing that learning and knowing in the actual work that I do with the population. But even better, I get to help other providers who care as well. And then that sort of even ripples out the work even further because they can grow in their work and share that with others in their health and healing journeys also.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing.
I think it's just so interesting and important to think about how people who have experienced trauma kind of compartmentalize body and mind as two separate things almost as a way to cope. And I feel like, especially as a person who's physically trained so intensely and mentally trained so intensely as a person in the military, it's like almost so difficult to combine the two. And that just makes so much sense as a way to kind of recover and come back in tune with who you are fully.
Yeah. And I appreciate your acknowledgement and understanding of that, because that actually brings rise to one of the other, incompatibilities in terms of the culture clash, is that the military culture, we have this idea that, pain is, weakness leaving the body, right? So just keep building your tolerance to it. And whereas in and in doing that, I should say, in doing that, we have to disconnect from our body. I remember a drill sergeant going through a qualification exercise and was running on a broken ankle. There have been so many different scenarios that I have witnessed where your physical injuries and how much they hurt you and are challenging you in the moment do not ever rise higher than the ultimate mission at hand, which is the mission as it's assigned, the achievement of that, and not letting down the larger good of the group. And so in order to do that sort of a thing, you have to tap out of your body. You have to become very disconnected with that. I'm going to no longer attend to what I am experiencing so that I can continue mentally to push forward, even through physical challenge. So thinking about that, yes. In when we think about the behavioral health culture, it is about how can we decrease everything that's happening? How can we come back into everything that's happening? How can we experience our emotions? How can we experience these feelings and sensations? Well, if you just try to put that perspective on someone without doing the psychoeducation, without honoring the culture that they're coming from and the recognition that this is different, that I realize that the way in which you have learned served a greater purpose. And it might be so hard for you to ever think about doing something different. You are about preserving tradition. It's a part of your identity. It's a part of your accomplishment. And now in this setting, we might be asking you to let go of all of that and do something different. So, you've got to recognize and attend and address the cultural divide, the disparities, but also do the psychoeducation about why someone might, why it might benefit them to have a different repertoire of skill sets. How well this worked for you over here, how well is it working for you in this part of your life? And really drawing from the differences, adding the psychoeducation, and then working at their pace to say, okay, as you're ready, we're going to come back into this. Because if you don't do that, you can overwhelm someone. They could be flooded with an acknowledgement of sensation or emotion, etc. You don't have the opportunity to titrate it, to pace it, if you don't recognize that. So again, I think that's really, really great that you even acknowledged and could think about that in terms of this population.
I think you're at this really, maybe I even say beneficial place where you can help clients that come to you because you said, hi, I'm here, I've lived this, I understand you. And also in teaching, advising, or training other behavioral health specialists in any capacity, saying, I've lived this, and this is maybe the question that you couldn't ask your clients, you can ask me. And I think that's a great point that you can be at to have not only the client, but also the provider. And you've recently led Serving Those Who Serve with us at the Connecticut Women's Consortium, and you will be teaching in Healing Service, Emboldening a Warrior's Resilient Way Forward, coming up soon. And could you kind of describe what the participants can expect from that kind of training? You hope they can walk away from after that training, or walk away with?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. And I'm super excited to be offering a new training with the consortium. So ultimately, the new training is a deeper dive, if you will, into the warrior culture. Serving those who serve, as deep as I do go with it, there's a lot more depth there. And so I'm really taking this new training a bit further. You don't have to have gone to the first training, but you won't lose anything in the new training if you haven't went to Serving Those Who Serve. But what In Healing Service will do is really delve deeper into the warrior culture. We're going to be talking about ethos, the spirit of the culture, the beliefs of the culture, the ideals of the culture, and really getting into an emphasis on the strengths that members of this population bring to the table because of those cultural influences, but also recognizing how those same strengths can really set them up for a bit of vulnerability. And if we can recognize, well, usually the easiest thing to recognize is the vulnerability, especially from an outsider. We can see the challenge, we can see what's causing some of the issues. But a lot of times, practitioners don't necessarily recognize the incredible strength that comes from the beliefs and ideals that informed the exact reason why they have these certain vulnerabilities. And so I'll give you an example if I can. We oftentimes think about how a service person can be particularly vulnerable to not acknowledging certain symptoms that they have, and how they often prolong their suffering for a long, long time before engaging, or, have a great deal of emotional restriction. Well, we can recognize those really easily as practitioners, but in working with this culture, it's also important to recognize the strength. And, stoicism is very embedded and ingrained in the warrior culture for mental, emotional, and even physical integrity promoting ways. We want to, really be able, even under the harshest of conditions, to move forward and not let our comrades down and accomplish the goals set forward by our oath and our commitment to our country in any way that looks at the time. And so oftentimes when we can recognize the strength, we can leverage those strengths to actually work towards interventions with the vulnerability. And a piece that is often lost and that causes a disconnection is not being aware of that. Having the ability to identify the strengths and pair them with the exact challenges that are presenting in your office to be worked upon can, one, show a greater deal of cultural knowledge and awareness, sensitivity, and cultural humility, but also build upon the connection, the rapport, the safety, the trust, the alliance, and the individual's ability to connect and engage with the treatment and the interventions at hand. Another thing would be to, gain insight into even more than I talked about today, some of the differences between military culture and behavioral health culture, and how, neither one is better or worse, but they're just different. And that, again, if we can be aware of those differences, we can work towards mitigating them as a barrier to care. Also, I want to move through, oftentimes, if people have heard me talk before my trainings, I go through the paradox of PTSD and how PTSD, yes, is in fact a diagnosable, clinically significant condition of mental health, but that the symptoms are also especially in a war zone environment, but even under operational stress or tactical environment, they are important resources and skill sets that individuals need to engage in life or death experiences or the potential for them. And so in this training, I want to take that awareness even further and sort through many of the survival concepts that inform the warrior perspective and aid in their survival, and really help practitioners recognize how they can harness their interventions, but more appropriately and effectively in reframing them to help the service person, develop a new set of skill sets. And we're going to review resiliency building factors, avenues of psychoeducation surrounding a variety of issues like stress. Ultimately and overall, I want to support the clinician in leveraging a service member, veteran, or family member's strengths and values to more effectively engage with the culture with confidence.
I think that's going to be great. Really being able to get the background of the culture and what you need to know to even engage with someone who has come back and is kind of now living in this new situation is very beneficial for a lot of providers. And this is going to be a great training. I know there's people who went to Serving Those Who Serve who said they loved your presentation and they really liked how you present and how you talk. And I'm sure the same thing is going to happen with a healing service for sure.
It's really important for me to be just incredibly appreciative of all of those who, open their ears and hearts to my voice. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us today. Links will be in the description to learn more about Amy and her work, sign up for her upcoming training, and keep up with us at the Women's Consortium. Her on-demand training, Serving Those Who Serve, will also be linked below. Thank you, and see you again next time.
Be kind to yourself. See you later.